For the summative assignment, let's get a little bit of a background on Transcendentalism so you have more context when you begin writing your response. So first, a little bit of history. In the very beginning of the nation, it was populated by native tribes. Now, normally when we're talking about it in a public school setting, you really get a lot of a focus on the European settlement, but I do want us to have an understanding that the country existed pre-colonization and it was heavily populated. Now, we actually believe that the first European who founded America was Leif Erikson. They did not stay and create a settlement, so we don't talk about it at length in terms of a history course. But this would be the first person that's actually been given credit for discovering the country in terms of European discovery. Then we get to Columbus. So Columbus was about 500 years after the Vikings had found America. And as you're looking at the routes, you can see that he really focused all of his exploration on the islands and then touched into Central towards South America. Columbus actually never hit the North American continent and certainly not the US, but he is given a lot of credit for that, specifically because there was a group, Knights of Columbus, very pro Catholicism, since the country itself had been founded on a lot of Protestant principles. And they, as a group, pushed Congress to want to make sure that Catholics were also being recognized for their contributions. So that's why we focus a lot on Christopher Columbus as the founder, and we don't spend a lot of time discussing Leif Erikson. Okay, now we get into the beginnings of European colonization as we know it. So this would be roughly the 1500s to the 1600s. And as you're looking at the map, the yellow would be English settlements. The green would be the French. Right here you have the Dutch. And then in Florida we get the Spanish. Now, as it leads up to American independence, on this map, we have the Americas in 1750, so we're getting up towards that independent mark. And as you're looking at it, it's the space in the yellow highlighted circle. With the green, you see the English making its way all the way down the East Coast. The purple is going to be the French, covering a lot of the Northeast, and then we have that orangey yellow, and that would be the Spanish stronghold. And then there's Independence Day. Now, just so you know, Independence Day is not when the colonies actually won independence. And really, we're talking about independence from Britain here. It's when they declared it, when it became official that the colonists were declaring independence. They actually won independence in 1783. So that was the end of the Revolutionary War. Okay, now this is where we want to focus our energy. So all of this history is just to get a lead up to after this country declares independence and it wants to become its own identity, we're going to see massive shifts in what they're focused on. So in 1789, so right after independence had been won, you can see the light pink are all the states. That darker maroon is where territory is being disputed. And then you can see that there's a pretty large space that's an unorganized territory. Now, if you look over to the middle and left, you can see that these giant patches still belong to Spain. Now, in 1802, not that long after, you can see that the country's switching up again. So we, again, have the states in the light pink. We have some disputed territories in the maroon. And I would really want you to take a look at what has happened to the middle of the country. It changed ownership. It was Spanish, now it's French. And by 1820, now we have massive patches of this beige, light brown color for the territories. So this was after the Louisiana Purchase, and those spaces had moved from Spanish and French over to now this new American identity. But you can see that all of these components have various influences. So there's a lot of Spanish influence, especially Florida, and then all the way up the West Coast. There had been Spanish and French in the middle of the country, and then there was English all along the East Coast for a very long time. So it's going to take some doing to turn all these areas with these different backgrounds into one united nation. And that's what we're talking about with Romanticism. So we're not going to get into this for too long, but just so you know, it's about 1820, so the period of that last map. And it goes up until about 1865. And Romanticism, which was also called the American Renaissance, is really just this understanding from the country that, hey, okay, we've won independence. We're starting to become this massive force, this large country. And we're going to need to decide on our culture and our identity. Who are we? What do we care about? What do we want to talk about? What should our art look like? What should our religion look like? All these components to try and figure out who are we now that we're free. So they had gained political independence, and now they wanted cultural independence. When we talk about Romanticism, it's particularly literary independence. So it's going to be what kind of books and literature are we putting out and how is it different from our forefathers. And this is where Transcendentalism comes in. Okay, so now we're to the heart of the matter. So 1820s-ish to 1865 is this whole period of Romanticism, and Transcendentalism fits under that umbrella. So Transcendentalism itself is really a religious movement. So again, it's this idea of who are we? How are we different from our European forefathers? What kind of nation do we want to be? So if you just think about the word to transcend, how can I make it? So it's really about, okay, if I'm seeing the world in front of me, this is what reality is. It's trees, it's flowers, it's grass, it's the earth, it's the stars, whatever it is. It's how can I get past the physical world to get to that spiritual world? How can I transcend my earthly experience and try to reach out and touch the divine? So that's what they're trying to do. So if you think about meditation is a major practice going on right now. It's really picked up speed. So that is a practice in which you try to really get in tune with yourself and with the universe in general, bring a feeling of peace, calm, more focus into your life. And it's a practice that helps you try and transcend your daily worries and concerns in order to touch on what's your purpose and what is the purpose of life. Another way of understanding the Transcendentalists would be what they were rebelling against. So it was old rules about what society needed to look like, religion, and just the past in general. It's a breaking away. They also fought against what they saw as their current situation. So they were very anti-slavery and pro-women's freedoms and rights. So these are their big questions. Okay, so if they're breaking away from things, they want to create something new. That doesn't mean that they didn't look outside of their own experience for inspiration. So, one school of thought that influenced them quite a bit, they looked towards the Germans. And there's this famous philosopher, Immanuel Kant. We can only understand through our own perception and can never fully understand an object in its own right. What this would mean is everything you ever view is tainted or affected in some way by the fact that you are the person viewing it. So, for example, whenever you look out into the world, we can always see our own noses, but we kind of ignore that fact all the time. So we forget that we are actually looking at part of our own face all the time, and we think we're just seeing the world as it is, but actually you're always seeing a part of you in the world every time you look out. Now that's a really physical description of it, but this is more of a metaphorical description of it, meaning who you are, where you were raised, what country you're in, how your family treats you, what gender you are, what age you are, your life experiences. All those things affect the way in which you see the world. So to give a different example would be something like, let's say that there was a nice house on a street. If you had been someone who was raised very, very wealthy and you were used to mansions, you might look at that house and think really negatively about it. However, if you were someone who had grown up experiencing homelessness, you might look at that house and think of it as a fantasy. So it's not the house itself that has remained the same. It is the experience of what you have had in your life, how that is shaping your view of the world. That's what they're talking about. They also looked to Eastern religions. So they started reading a lot of Hindu and Buddhist scriptures. This would be that influence of meditation, of accessing the divine in different ways than they had tried to do before. The understanding of yin-yang balance, that was new. That was something they explored a lot. And so they took some key ideas from these other places, but also made it distinctly American. So a big one is going to be nonconformity. You do not have to do what everyone else is doing. In fact, it's probably better if you don't. Another one is self-reliance. Don't rely on other people. Be independent. That idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. In terms of divinity, you do not need to go through a hierarchy. You do not need to go through a priest or attend a church. You can access the divine, and actually you can do it best by going out into nature. And that brings us to a giant nature focus, obviously, because it becomes the new American church. You can go for a hike and be able to experience the divine. And then lastly, free thinking. They had a major focus on freedom in general, so that went for women and slaves and thinking. Use your own thinking, use your own intuition to guide your life. Okay, and then looking at those key ideas, I think it's very easy to see how some of those inspired some push for social reform. So they became very involved in anti-slavery and pro-women's rights efforts. And again, this is because they believed everyone should be free and everyone had access to the divine equally. So it would make no sense to subjugate certain groups while others were able to maintain a higher rung on this social ladder. Okay, and now we come to your task. choose 2 of the key ideas of Transcendentalism that I just discussed. You're going to write 2 paragraphs per key idea in which you connect McCandless from Into the Wild and the Transcendentalist ideas. Now, you don't have to say that he perfectly aligned. You could actually argue that he went against or that he used a version of it, but it's not quite accurate. That's fine. You must be specific, and you need to have 4 quotes from throughout the text. So you will need textual evidence. It cannot just come from the first 3 chapters or the last 2 chapters or whatever the case may be. It would have to be from 4, roughly, different places from the text. Now, if you want help, I am certainly available. You can email me anytime. And you can also look at your own assignment responses, because if you've been following along and following the directions, you actually have a lot of this work that you've already been brainstorming. So all of those assignments should lead you to do a really nice job on this final assessment. If you have any questions, let me know.